One 19th century author towered over all others in the mind of his fellow writers. Virginia Woolf called him the greatest of all novelists. Matthew Arnold said a novel by him was not a work of art, but a piece of life. And Anton Chekhov declared that what he does serves to justify all the hopes and aspirations invested in literature. The writer they all sought to praise was not just a giant of Russian literature, but of all 19th century art. His name was Leo Tolstoy. Count Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy was born to an aristocratic Russian family in 1828 at Yasnaya Polyana, the family's estate 8 miles southwest of Tula. His parents died when he was a child, and he was raised by relatives. Tolstoy was an indifferent student and left his university studies without achieving a degree. He returned to the family estate, and though his writing career began at this time, he led a fairly dissolute life, chasing women and gambling. The debts from his wagering forced him to join the army, and he served as an artillery officer in the Crimean War and was present during the 11th-month-long siege of Sevastopol in 1854 and 1855. As a result of his experiences in the war and a public execution he witnessed in Paris during an 1857 visit, Tolstoy underwent a profound change of consciousness during the 1860s. The young libertine obsessed with wine and women experienced an intense spiritual awakening. His literal interpretation of the ethical teachings of Jesus caused him to become a pacifist and fervent Christian anarchist. The truth is, he wrote, that the state is a conspiracy designed not only to exploit, but above all to corrupt its citizens. Henceforth, I shall never serve any government anywhere. On September 23, 1862, Tolstoy married Sophia Behrs, the daughter of a court physician. Sonia, as Tolstoy called her, unfailingly supported her husband's writing efforts, working as his secretary, financial manager, and editor, and their union would allow Tolstoy the freedom to write his greatest works. In 1869, he produced War and Peace, now generally considered to be one of the greatest novels ever written. An epic work of almost impossible scope, War and Peace features 580 characters and chronicles the French invasion of Russia in 1812 and its effect on 5 Russian families. Tolstoy was a novelist of the realist school, and his grasp of detail and psychological insight brought a new kind of consciousness to literature. Because War and Peace had so many chapters dealing with philosophy and historical theory, Tolstoy didn't think it should be considered a novel. He felt that his next masterpiece, Anna Karenina, which he wrote in 1877, was actually his first book of that type. Anna Karenina tells the story of an adulterous woman constrained by the conventions of Moscow society and a kindly landowner who seeks to reform the lives of the peasants that work his fields, much like Tolstoy himself. Despite their popularity, Tolstoy later dismissed both War and Peace and Anna Karenina as not being true representations of his lofty ideals. But today, both are considered indisputable classics of world literature. In fact, Anna Karenina was chosen to be a selection of Oprah Winfrey's television book club in 2004. Thanks to her recommendation, a new translation released that year sold 800,000 copies in the U.S. alone. Tolstoy continues to influence new generations of readers to this day. Tolstoy's work was highly influenced by his dialogue with Americans. His interactions with them greatly influenced his work, and their works, in turn, were influenced by his writings. He received over 2,500 letters from Americans during his lifetime, and visitors from the U.S. were the most frequent guests to Tolstoy's estate. Presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan visited in 1903, and he was so fascinated by Tolstoy that he postponed an audience with the Tsar so he could spend more time with the famous author. Tolstoy had great interest in American authors, initially inspired by his admiration for the writings of Benjamin Franklin. As a young man, Tolstoy read and tried to follow the 13 virtues listed in Franklin's autobiography. Like Franklin, he kept a daily journal of his activities. But while Franklin would write down the virtuous things he had done each day, Tolstoy made lists of his failures. The American economist Henry George had a huge influence on Tolstoy. George believed that private ownership of land should not exist, and that rents on land should go towards public infrastructure. After reading George's 1879 book, Progress and Poverty, Tolstoy declared that George was one of the greatest men of the 19th century. And he was so passionate about George's ideas that he made several characters in his novels proponents of the economist's philosophy. Perhaps the greatest example of Tolstoy's dialogue with American writers was his relationship with the writings of the American poet and transcendentalist philosopher Henry Thoreau. Tolstoy was delighted by Thoreau's Walden and its description of the sort of ascetic, pastoral life that Tolstoy sought to live. But he was especially enamored of Thoreau's civil disobedience and its description of nonviolence as a response to oppression, which corresponded with Tolstoy's ideas about Christian pacifism. Tolstoy himself translated the essay into Russian, and it was published there by Tolstoy's own publishing house. This dialogue with Americans was spread by Tolstoy's writing throughout the world. Indian nationalist Mahatma Gandhi was greatly influenced by Tolstoy. In his autobiography, Gandhi said that Tolstoy was the greatest apostle of nonviolence that the present age has produced. As Russian writer Galina Alexieva puts it, Thoreau was the seed, Tolstoy the tree, and Gandhi the fruit. Gandhi's embrace of nonviolence in turn greatly influenced the civil rights struggles of Dr. Martin Luther King in the 1960s, and continues to influence the Black Lives Matter protests of today. Thus, Tolstoy's ideas live on and remain a force for peace and progress that continues to this day.